So, hi everyone. This is yet another video in the series that I'm doing that explains and illuminates the spiritual care modalities that I use in my work, both for the purposes of helping potential clients to have a better understanding of what it might be like to work with me, but also for just anyone to help them learn about different spiritual care practices and spiritual practices and also care modalities that they may or may not choose to work with me on. And also, this is a series for practitioners of particular care modalities, should you want to expand your understanding of your own craft or develop, new ideas for how to approach your own work. So, whoever you are and for whatever reason you're here, thanks so much for listening. This particular video is focused on what I'm calling in my own work disability doulaship. I don't necessarily know of a lot of people who, use that terminology for explaining this modality of care, but it is, as the word implies, in line with other forms of doulaship, such as birth doulaship and death doulaship, which are modalities by which someone is accompanied by a doula through the process of bringing either a child to term or preparing for their own eventual death. Doula meaning essentially a companion through a major transition or threshold crossing. For disability doulaship, my work centers on supporting people who are disabled in some way, either because either they've been disabled for a long time or they have recently entered into the reality of disability and are trying to find a way to not just like adapt to that reality and like either a practical or psychological or somatic sense, but from a spiritual perspective, to be witnessed and accompanied they as they reckon with and navigate and integrate the many feelings and just experiences that come with living as a disabled person. And I offer this and I say this as someone who is disabled myself. I live with various chronic conditions that are they're not curable, they're manageable, depending on external circumstances and internal factors. They will fluctuate in terms of their severity. But I have had many, periods in my life when I was basically out for the count because of my disabilities. And that, of course, can happen again in the future, depending on factors that I might be able to predict and others that I simply cannot. And I know from personal experience how intense the disabled experience can be and how much it brings up questions not just of like the practical, medical, financial sort, but also existential and spiritual questions. And many of those questions can be very grief laden. They can include a lot of difficult feelings, a lot of you know, just sitting with really hard stuff. But it is all and it is also my experience that it is my experience that the disabled experience is a place that is also incredibly rich for discerning spiritual revelations and realizations for oneself. It is a very sacred experience to be disabled, which doesn't mean that it's enjoyable. It's not to romanticize it, but it is to acknowledge that a lot of spiritual traditions, what people are seeking to get at when it comes to deepening into their spiritual lives, is to surrender sometimes to a power that's greater than themselves, or to feel themselves as part of something that is bigger than what they alone can account for and control. And by those metrics, disability is that. There are so many experiences for disabled folks where we simply are not in control of our situation, and that can be terrifying, and it often is. But it can also be a place where we are being invited into a practice of surrender and trust in something that is bigger than certainly our minds, but even our bodies. And given that the rates of various disabling conditions are skyrocketing in an era of ecological devastation and human, like, social harm and oppression. I think it's very fair to say, and I'm certainly not alone in making this claim, that the disabilities are that the increased rates of disabilities are ecological responses to how how the human species has shown up in relationship with reality, and as such, disability can be a really important, and I would argue sacred, experience wherein the landscape of our bodies is actually in resonance with the landscape of the reality around us. In a world that is plagued with global warming, the increased rates of inflammation in our bodies are mirrors to that. And the disabled experience can therefore be a place where we, yes, often through pain, but maybe also other things as well, can actually feel ourselves to be unquestionably in relationship with processes that extend beyond us. And that is the bread and butter of the spiritual experience. And so therefore, I don't think it's any stretch to say that the disabled experience is inevitably a spiritual experience, both in the sense that it brings to mind spiritual questions for the people who are experiencing disability, but it is also a spiritual and an ecological and a social manifestation of processes that extend beyond the individual body. And so in my own work with disability doulaship, I ascribe to the social model of disability, which, for those who don't know what that means, as opposed to thinking of disability as something that is just simply lodged in a particular body, like your body is defective in some way. The social model of disability understands disability to actually be a social and a relational outcome of a system. So someone is only disabled by being in a wheelchair if a particular building doesn't have ramps or elevators. If they did have ramps and elevators, that person would be able to enter that building. But because the social environment is structured such that it is not accessible to that person, then that person is indeed disabled by the fact that they are not able to enter that building. And so this isn't to say that there is no internal medical reality to disability. Of course there is. It's just to say that the approach that I take to disability doulaship work is to help clients actually understand that what they are experiencing in and through and with their bodies is in relationship to the environment that they're in. And even if they cannot change the environment that they're in, to just have that understanding is sometimes a really huge paradigm shift for a client in helping them in helping to alleviate a sense of failure or responsibility, but also as a way of helping a disabled person to feel less isolated and to feel more in relationship with the wider world, because not only does the social model of disability speak to, or to me at least, it doesn't just speak to the limitations of our social environment, it also speaks to the ways in which disabled bodies can sometimes be in a really deep relationship with certain elements of our world and our environment. And many are the tales, not the tales like as if it's myth, but in like the fake sort, but many are the examples, for example, of artists who live with particular disabilities and for whom their disabilities help to open up worlds for them that are showcased through their art, that the average able-bodied person is not able to access. Examples of this include Frida Kahlo, Van Gogh, Monet, people who various types of disabilities actually gave them a very particular perspective on the world that that actually transformed how the rest of the world saw the world. And so disability doulaship for me in my work is a process by which I'm seeking to support people who live with disability to deepen their own relationship to their bodies in a way that allows them to behold and be held by their bodies in new and more whole-making ways. And also helps them to behold and be held by the world in new ways, by not simply viewing the disability as a limitation, though I don't negate the fact that to be disabled is to have the lived experience of limitation, but to also help, like, in addition to recognizing and reckoning and grieving and living with our limitations, to also feel into, and what do those particular limitations how do those particular limitations also facilitate other types of capacities to see the world in a different way, to relate to the world in a way that maybe actually helps us to invite our community into a healthier relational dynamic with our environment. Because those of us who are living with disabilities that are ecologically related, due to increased rates of temperatures and shifts in weather patterns and vegetation and all of that. It is our bodies that are in some ways like weather vanes for our communities, and can help our collectives to re-enter into right relationship with our ecology, not by perhaps reversing the devastation that it has happened and is happening, but to help us to discern new ways to actually re-enter into an appreciation of the reality of our incarnate limitations. The disabled vessel is a very ready reminder for the social sphere of the incarnate experience of being limited, of not being able to avoid sickness, of not being able to avoid aging and eventually death. And as terrifying as that is for the modern psyche, it is also incredibly necessary for the modern consciousness to be re-invited back into a remembrance of our own incarnate selves that include injury, that include illness, and that eventually include old age and death and dying. And that is not something to be dismissed or avoided, but rather reckoned with. And when we're able to reckon with that reality of the incarnate experience by not shoving it into a shadow realm, we're actually able to reduce the amount of harm that can come from that sort of denial, of the fact that to be disabled is one of, if not the most common experiences, because if we live a good, long, healthy life, we all eventually lose capacities before we also then eventually die. And the more that we are able to come into a loving relationship with our own existing disabilities and our ability to appreciate the sanctity of disability and limitation and illness, the more we are able to engender a wider culture that appreciates those things as well, that honors them for the common, normal, and also holy experience that they are, which again is not to romanticize them, but to name them as important experiences in their own right. And all of that benefits not just an individual person, but an entire collective. So if you're someone who is disabled, either, recently having entered into that reality, or, you've been navigating this for a long time, but are interested in seeing um, how to develop a more spiritually rich relationship with your disabilities, with your medical conditions, and seeing seeing how your disabilities might help to inform the spiritual existential approach that you take to your day-to-day life. I just really, really honor like that longing as someone who experiences it myself, and who is working on that myself, and would be honored to work with you. Of course, I know that for many disabled folks, finances can be a challenge. So this is a particular offering where I seek as much as possible to support people with payment plans, and sometimes even like bartering, like shared resources, because even though I need to make my own ends meet, I also want to do what I can to make these kinds of offerings accessible to other people. This is also a realm where if live work is hard, like on either on a phone call or on Zoom, asynchronous type of care, like through exchanging of audio notes, or other types of communication, are also things that I'm open to, if that would be supportive to a particular client, because when we're disabled, sometimes scheduling things can be tricky, because it's not predictable when we'll be available for an appointment. So just know that if you're someone who wishes to explore the spiritual facet of your disabilities, I'd be honored to work with you. And also there are many, many people who are disability advocates and activists, and who are also people who have spiritual approach to their disability work. And there are, collectives online, as well on social media, and many platforms, if you're looking for more communal support for conditions that you live with. So just know that you're not alone in having these kinds of longings and questions and inquiries, and I'm available for support, as well as others in in the world, in the virtual world, and wherever your disabilities and spiritual inquiries and explorations take you. May you feel held in that process, and may you also deepen your capacity to behold your process and to behold your body and the conditions that you live with greater and greater love and reverence. So thank you so much for listening, and yeah, look forward to potentially working with you.